In this video, we're going to get into actually sending a purchase order, but before we do that, I need to show you a couple things that are set up for handling all these different packages. So the first thing that I want to do is we're going to do an ls on our common folder just so you can see what's in here. And right now there's a file called interface.go. So let's take a look at that first. And you'll notice that all this thing does is it sets up some types, and they're called interfaces because they're basically the structure that we're going to use to create our packages. And if you remember from the previous video, we had a generic thing called PKG that we created of type whatever. There were three functions that were in each of them. There was a parse package, verify package, and process package. Well, this interface is what is allowing us to make sure that any instance of a package that we create, that they have to support these three functions in order to be a valid interface. And so that's what allows that other page to be very, very generic and only call those three functions, because it knows that whatever class it ends up creating, that it will support those three. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we'll go into our let's see, our packages folder. And so this is where we actually create all of our packages. Now, one of the things that we have here is a generic file called structures, and this is where we actually create the individual instances or the different structures that we're going to use inside of our objects that we create. So right here, just as an example, we're only going to be working with the PO in this set of videos. So we'll just look here. We have a PO send structure, and it has purchase orders and a BSV key and a DB that's part of this structure. If we look, the purchase order is actually an array, which means the system has the ability to receive multiple purchase orders at once, or it can receive them one at a time. It really doesn't matter. And then here is our type PO that it's actually creating. So here you can see we have a PO array, or an array of PO, and here is what a PO is. It has a PO ID and all the billing and shipping and payment information, and it also contains another array called item. And if you look here, here's what an item consists of. So this file is really responsible for just a generic listing of all of the different structures that we're going to be using inside the application. So it will grow as we add more and more interfaces. Now, what we want to look at next is going to be the PO send method, and this is going to be where all of the work happens for a purchase order that's getting sent to the system. You'll remember from the last video that we had a parse package function that got called. Well, here is the definition of the parse package function inside of PO send. So if we were doing an inventory request, for example, it's going to have a different set of things that happen for it versus this type of function. So they all know what they're doing. They're all individual, but having these generic classes like this allows us to be able to expand this thing pretty rapidly without having to do a lot of extra work. Now, the first thing that happens on this parse package is it goes out and unmarshals. Now, we're getting a JSON object, which in the case of them sending over a JSON object to us, it's really just a string. It looks a lot like a URL, like a get URL. It's got a lot of field names and values that are coming over to us, but we don't want to work with it in that string form. We want to actually convert it into a list of an array, and in our case, a dictionary inside of Go. If you're using C# or some other language to do this, PHP, then you're going to do something a little bit different, but you're wanting to put it into an array that you're going to be working with in your programming language. So it makes it really, really easy to work with the data. Now, once we unmarshal the information and we get our array, we make sure we don't get any errors, and then we set our BSV key and our database connection for our structure that we created, and then we return. So parse package is really quick and dirty. It just takes the string, converts it into an array, makes sure everything's okay, and then gets out. Now, the next thing, if you remember from the other code, was a verify package. Now, in our case, we want to make sure that we got a purchase order. We want to make sure that we have a dealer number and a dealer PO number, that it's not missing, and that we actually have items that they want to order, because it doesn't make any sense that we receive a purchase order with no items on it. So all the verify package is doing is, for whatever type of package we're supporting at that particular point, it's verifying for sure that we have the information that we need so that we can continue. So it's as things come up that we need to make sure that this information is there, like a quantity, for example, that right now this thing isn't looking to see if there's a quantity. Maybe that becomes, actually it is, but maybe that becomes something that we need to add. We'll just come in and add that verification process in here and expand the utility that way. Now, the final thing that happens is the PO send. This is where we're actually processing the package. And if you remember from the earlier video, it was called process package, and we passed over information. Now, the previous function up here has already expanded the data into an array that we're going to be working with. So we really don't need the HTTP request anymore. We actually have what we need to accept a purchase order. So all we're going to do is we're just going to start coming down through here and looking at all of our purchase orders, and that's what this is doing. It's looking at each purchase order. You can ignore all the comments there. It's looking at each purchase order, grabbing a dealer PO, and then it runs through a series of queries to see if the purchase order is already in the system, if it's already been processed by the vendor. If not, it deletes it and puts it in again. If it has, then it returns an error saying that you can't send this thing again because it's already been sent. And then after it passes all of that, it starts to put the data in. So this is just queries. There really isn't a whole lot going on here other than the process of actually inserting purchase order data into the table so that the vendor can pull it out and work with it. So there's not, I'm not going to go through all of the, how do you run a query kind of stuff, but it's very generic, and you ought to be able to just look at it and see what's actually going on here. When you're looking at the code. The primary thing is that each one of these packages all have those three functions in them. They all have their arrays and things that they're the fields that are set up in the different structures in that interface file, and they're all pretty identical. So actually adding another method or anything like that is a matter of modifying a couple files and then recompiling the application. And in the final video, I'm going to actually show you how to compile the application and what goes into running it.